good evening. It's wonderful to have you all here. I'm really looking forward to the night. So thank you so much for coming here. You know, Twitter was brought to the attention of the policy world, the world in which so many of us operate, back when the Iranian re-election of President Ahmadinejad happened. The election came into question. Iranians took to the street to challenge it. The government cracked down. And of course, the protesters simply moved their protests into the blogosphere on Twitter. Twitter then came to our attention here in San Francisco when the opportunity came to attract this really great company to a really great town. So we're very grateful, Dick, that you're here. I would say that most recently, though, that Twitter has had our attention in part because the foreign minister of Iran and the foreign minister of France seem to be trading salvos over who is right and who is wrong when it comes to the negotiations on the nuclear weapons or the nuclear program in Iran. And as you know, many people attribute that platform to being a key vehicle throughout the Arab Spring. As you look at this picture, though, I mean, you know that at 9,000 tweets a second or a minute, this is not just for foreign ministers and it's not just for protesters, right? It's for a larger community, an extraordinary, continuously growing community of users. And among those users are, in fact, the agency, our space agency, NASA, UNICEF is a user, just about every famous basketball player you've heard of, not to mention Stanford professor, and the young lady that I am about to introduce now. Her name is Vivian Hart. Vivian Hart first started using Twitter about a year ago at the advanced age of 8. She had heard about the problem of human trafficking, modern day slavery, and she wanted to take a stand. And so what Vivian did was what any 8-year-old, sensible 8-year-old would do. She set up a lemonade stand. And she raised about $100 with that lemonade stand to try to combat human slavery. And it's crossed her mind that actually she would, if she wanted to really make a dent on this problem, she would have to go global. And that's where Twitter came in. So Vivian did a very smart marketer, a young woman. She tweeted Nicholas Kristof at the New York Times and let him know of her plan, because wouldn't you all do that whenever you had a well-developed plan? And Nicholas Kristof retweeted her message, and a movement was begun. She now has raised about $100,000 with her lemonade, and has which she's donated to an organization called Not for Sale. And now she's has started a company. She's now 9 after all. And she is in the Bay Area after all. And so of course she's an entrepreneur. And that company is a for-purpose company. It will be donated. It's now, you can get the lemonade in 150 stores, and some of the proceeds will be donated to this very cause. So, Vivian, would you come up and present the honors to Mr. Costolo? To you, her name is @VivianHar.
Hello everyone, I'm Vivian and I'm a proud member of the World Affairs Council. Thank you, Ms. Wells, for inviting me to this very fancy party to introduce this very fancy man, Mr. Costolo. Mr. Costolo is a special person for 3 main reasons. 1, he let me ring the bell for his company. This is amazing and scary and wonderful and scary. Now, he could have rung the bell because he's the big bird at Twitter. But instead, he let a user do it. And that's smart, because I'm 9, and I'll be a happy customer for like 20 years. Second, he's funny. I read his tweets and they make me laugh. I bet he's the funniest CEO on Twitter. And finally, he's the boss at Twitter. Only my favorite company in the world. Well, behind American Girl. I set up my lemonade stand every day, rain or shine, to help end child slavery. I use Twitter to tell the world. With Twitter, you don't have to be big or powerful to change the world. You can be just like me. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the big bird, Mr. Costolo.
So Vivian, come join us. Sarah, we'll just give you your award. Sarah is coming up with it. Vivian, why don't you come join me up here?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Thanks so much. Vivian, here.
We're going to have you stand right here and say hi.
Yeah. Come on, hold on. Hold on. Okay. Good job. Good job.
Thanks, Vivian. So for all of you who thought you couldn't do anything important with 140 characters or less,
I was telling somebody who works for me today, I said, imagine, Vivian's children in the future. They're going to be like 10, and she's going to be, she's going to say, when I was your age, I'd opened the stock market, I did the Global Affairs Council, and look at you, you're licking a lollipop, you're digging in the dirt. Come on. Oh my God.
so aside from...
She's going to get asked to she's going to IPO some company like 20 years from now. She's going to, I did this 20 years ago. Somebody else, my CFO can do it.
So beyond Vivian,
Yeah.
I mean, you've said that you and the co-founders didn't fully anticipate all the ways in which...
Can I just say one more thing, though? When she rang the bell, so we were at the New York Stock Exchange before we have this, and Vivian wore her princess outfit to the New York Stock Exchange opening, which is just awesome. And we had Vivian and this woman from the Boston Police Department who they had been so, it had been so vital the night of the manhunt in Boston, and they had been so on the ball on the platform. And then Sir Patrick Stewart, the actor who uses it so vividly, and he's in a duet of plays now at the Court Theater in New York. And I thought, well, Sir Patrick Stewart's going to get up there, and he's going to have this presence, and it was completely upstaged by Vivian. So when I found out she was doing this thing tonight, I thought, great, it's going to be my turn to be upstaged by the 9-year-old. All right, sorry, go ahead.
So, well, beyond... It is your night. Beyond her clever use of Twitter, what are some of the smartest ways you've seen the platform be used?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Of course, from my own personal background, I tend to enjoy the the Shakespearean brevity as the soul of wit moments on the platform. Some of my favorites are, so I guess it was about 2 years ago now, this time Sarah Silverman, the comedian, had said around the holidays, she said, when your family is really driving you crazy around the holidays, just pretend you're in a Woody Allen movie. And Mia Farrow responded, I tried that and it didn't work. And she's, I was immediately following Mia Farrow. And her son, Ronan, is also extraordinarily witty on the platform. Again, there are just these conversations that happen that would never happen before, and you get these moments from people that you don't expect them from. So the Canadian hip-hop artist, the Canadian rapper Drake, sends out a tweet, again, a while ago, he sends out a tweet and says, you know, the first million is the hardest, and that's what he says, he tweets. And T. Boone Pickens responds, the first billion is a hell of a lot harder. and you know, and Drake replies, I think I just got punked by, you know, T. Boone Pickens. And so, I mean, these are kind of conversations that you would never see conversations like that. And it's funny to see these, you know, these personalities that you didn't know necessarily had that in them, respond in the moment to those kinds of things. Even during the most recent presidential debates, when Romney made the comment about Sesame Street, there was a parody Big Bird account within 1 minute saying, you know, we'll tweet for food, and, you know, and with a sandwich board around his neck, and, you know, you're wondering, like, wow, there's someone like in a war room waiting to respond to this, whatever's happening in the debate. It was literally, you know, 90 seconds later that account was created and doing that. So, and of course that created this whole moment on Twitter that everyone started talking about and became an entire discussion the next day. So these moments that occur constantly on the platform and amplify the feelings that people around the world have regularly, it's just changed the whole way people communicate. It's changed politics, it's changed economics, it's changed everything.
So, well, let's talk a little bit about sort of social change, since that's where Vivian took us. And that is, as you think about, you know, Vivian's working on a long-term problem, sad to say, a chronic problem rather than an acute one. But when you think about Twitter, it is essential in crises, as it was with the Boston Police Department after the marathon bombings. What are you seeing now in the case of the typhoon in the Philippines?
The very same thing. We just, we have these all-hands meetings once every 2 weeks, and we have a segment called Twitter in the World where we talk about, you know, the ways it's being used in the world. And today we played a video segment from Channel 4 in the UK that had a reporter on the scene in the UK, and someone had tweeted to the reporter who was on the scene from Channel 4, my mom and dad are in this town, you know, 2 miles inland from this storm, and, you know, I haven't heard from them, and can you see if someone can go find out if they're okay? And the reporter sort of trudged up there 2 miles in and had a satellite phone and found the mom and father, and even though the house and everything around it looked like it was devastated, they were there, and they got on the satellite phone with their son and responded that they were okay, and they had no other way to reach him. And it's just, I mean, it's incredible. You see things like that happen constantly. The relief aid in the aftermath of the typhoon, and the organization of the relief aid that's happening on the platform is extraordinary. So those kinds of things are remarkable, both for their use in the moment and their use in organizing in the aftermath of the moment. I remember during the London riots, you know, there was all this, there's always rumor, and I got this question when we were on the roadshow pitching investors. Someone at one of the lunches said, well, you know, the problem with your platform is when there are these chaotic events, people just spread rumors on it. In fact, the night of the Boston manhunt, you know, somebody tweeted that they were looking for so-and-so, and that wasn't the person they were looking for. And my response to that was, well, it's always the case that in the aftermath of these chaotic events, there's rumor. And I remember in the Oklahoma City bombings, long before Twitter, right, for a good 48 hours, we were looking for people of a certain ethnic descent that were driving a certain kind of car. And of course, we found out, you know, several days later, that's not at all what we were looking for. And with Twitter, because you have these 250 million people around the world, nearly 250 million people around the world using it, of course you get the chaos of information asymmetry in the immediate aftermath of the event, but you also get this immediate crowd correcting of what's going on. I remember during the London riots, people would say, oh, you know, the King's Cross tube station is on fire, and someone would jump in and respond with a photo of the King's Cross tube station saying, no, I'm actually there right now, and it's everything's fine, and here's a picture of it. So there's this remarkable combination of both amplifying the noise in the aftermath of the event and much more quickly self-correcting in the aftermath of an event.
Right. Sort of the Wikipedia effect of constant editing happening. So, we're talking about kind of governance in a crisis, in essence. But it doesn't just take crises for Twitter to be a useful platform for governments. You told me about a town in Spain that is relying on Twitter as say something about that.
Yeah, so there's a town near Grenada called June, J-U-N, and they are essentially using and leveraging Twitter as the organizing communication platform in town. The police cars have their Twitter handles of the police department on the cars. And the entire town is essentially run that way. So you can communicate with the police department when you see a car go by, well, there's the Twitter ID of the police department, and you can tweet at the police department. And again, the entirety of the town is run that way. The mayor runs the town that way. And so it's an entirely public, broadcast-based town. And I think that will be, irrespective of whether it's Twitter or a collection of other platforms, the case that more and more information will be public and coordinated, and it will become increasingly difficult for governments that rely on siloing information and preventing information from passing between boundaries, physical or abstract, to do that, because it will just necessarily be the case that this information is out there and it will be impossible to suppress it.
So where are there efforts to clamp down on Twitter, to make it inaccessible? What countries?
Well, so we're still blocked in Iran. We're blocked in China. In fact, the Iranian president and foreign minister, who used the platform to great effect, the founder of Twitter, one of the three founders of Twitter and the inventor of the product, Jack Dorsey, tweeted to the Iranian president when the Iranian president was engaging in, if you will, in diplomacy with the world and with the U.S. government on Twitter. Jack responded to him and said, it's great to see you on the platform and using the platform. Can your people in your country hear you, what you're saying on the platform? And I thought that was a profound thing for Jack to say. And so hopefully the Iranians, understanding how powerful it has been for them, to be perfectly frank, recently in the political spectrum, will open it up again to their people. And hopefully the Chinese and the government of China will open up Facebook and Twitter to their people as well.
So as I remember it, somebody said to you, you better double check to make sure this is the real Rouhani. What was your response?
We knew it was. We had been communicating with the foreign minister and the department there to understand whether it really was who they said it was, and it was confirmed that it was indeed the president's account, and they were using it. So I didn't engage with the account, nor did Jack, till we knew that's who it was.
So I thought, you see, your press is really good. So let me say what I thought. What you said was, I'm not in charge of that. I'm in charge of making sure he stays within 140 characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the governance issue. Let me just actually go back to China, because Ai Weiwei seems to be able to get through. I mean, the artist and dissident seems to be able to get through. So there seem to be ways to get around.
Yeah, so there are these, the way the Chinese block Twitter is through what is colloquially referred to as the Great Firewall of China. And the government blocks certain domains from being accessible inside the country. People who know how to do so leverage these VPNs, virtual private networks, to essentially tunnel under or over the firewall and access Twitter. So we do have, frankly, a large number of users inside China who know how to do that and do access us, like the great artist Ai Weiwei, who has been, the remarkable thing about Twitter in China is there are literally people who have been sent to labor camps for extended periods of time for retweeting a sarcastic comment about the government that another user made. So really a single single character publishing of hitting the retweet button has caused people to be sent to labor camps, which is, I mean, it's incredible. And so for folks like Ai Weiwei to use the platform as openly as he does, and he's referred to Twitter as his art in language form, in the face of knowing he's under threat of being further punished by the government there. He's been put into house arrest previously for his use of Twitter, it's an extraordinary thing. We take it for granted, and yet here's someone who uses it regularly knowing that his next use of the platform could result in his further imprisonment.
And in most of the positive stories we've just told about governance, we're talking about successful governments, as in the case of this town in Spain, that have as their, please toast the lemonade, that have,
quite good.
It's very good, that have as their, the big part of the reason they succeed is that they are communicating with their citizens, they're listening to the voices of their citizens, they're adapting in response to the voice of their citizens. This is also true when it comes to the world of commerce. I mean, one of the things Twitter allows you to do, even as a very, very small mom and pop company, is to communicate directly with the customer.
Yeah, so the funny thing about, we'll talk about commerce for a second. The funny thing about commerce on Twitter is that people in business schools, and especially in marketing departments, they've talked about this notion of one-to-one marketing forever. There's been this, in the future, you'll just talk directly to Dick and and the future of marketing is one-to-one marketing. It's largely been a myth and nonsense and not really anything that's ever really happened. And yet the beauty of doing that on Twitter, and I'll give you a great example. One we used on the roadshow during the IPO is some guy named Garrett, who I don't happen to know, sends this tweet about a run he went on and CC's Nike running and says, I just set a personal record for a 5K for myself at, he CC's Nike running and puts his time in there. And Nike responds with this image and this message that's written over the image to Garrett about setting personal records, and it's this beautifully high-definition image with this personalized message to Garrett. And now, historically, it would be stupid for Nike to invest that kind of money to go do that, because the investment in doing it and yet communicating to one person would be so expensive. But on Twitter, the beauty of that direct engagement is, one, of course, immediately you gain the loyalty and admiration of Garrett, but you also are broadcasting that for everyone else to see. And although it's a direct connection to this person, Garrett, everybody else gets this reflection of it back to them as what they could do and what they could be saying about their run and what they should be doing. And maybe I should be trying to set a personal record on my run. And even though that's not explicit in Nike's communication back to Garrett, it's very, very much implied, and you see it in the volume of retweets that the Nike tweet gets from not just Garrett, but thousands of other people who hold on to that and see that their communication with him is really also a communication with them. So it's this incredible one-to-one marketing platform that amplifies the effects of you reaching out to one person and communicating with them by other people mirroring it back to themselves.
Right. And of course, Nike's a huge company. I think in terms of a very small and growing company, again, an artisanal, some mom and pop store. The price of entry when it comes to brand building seems very low with Twitter. And I keep wondering, what does this mean for a little company in the developing world where...
Of course. I was in Japan last February and walking down the street with a couple folks from our Tokyo office, and walked past this corner restaurant, and it was some I don't speak Japanese, so there's this writing on the outside, board outside the restaurant, but with the @ sign and the name of the restaurant, and then this hashtag, and I asked what it said, and you could basically tweet to the restaurant and make reservations for that night over Twitter. At least that's what they told me it said. It could have said something else, and they probably laughed at me a great deal after I left. But, I mean, you know, there's a family-owned restaurant that's using the platform as their reservation system.
Yeah. So over 80% of your users are outside of the United States.
That's correct.
And I think a lot of people see it as a North American phenomenon, and of course, that couldn't be farther from true. You know, think about cities in Africa are now, you know, have broadband access, have 3G, have, you know, low-cost tablets, have low-cost smartphones. There's the opportunity, at least for city dwellers in Africa, to start very small businesses and go very far.
Of course. I mean, it's the same thing as the restaurant in Japan, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are 2.4 billion connected people around the world right now. The volume of smartphones will be in all their hands in short order through these low-end devices and low-power devices and low-power smartphones that are being created and distributed. That number will double again in the next N years. So it will be very, very, very quickly that billions, literally everybody, will be within reach of one of these low-power, at least low-power smartphones, and be able to leverage these kinds of platforms. It will be faster than probably everybody anticipates, even knowing that it will happen quickly.
Right. Now, we were talking earlier about sort of the political effect, and obviously there's the reference to Twitter revolutions, there's a reference to Arab Spring, but as you see
It's
something...
funny that it was called the Arab Spring because it happened in the winter.
In January, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little bit weird that it's called the Arab Spring. It was January.
And did you tweet that back to them?
Well, I didn't want to be rude and correct them. Plus, I don't know how to say spring in Arabic. But this is just peculiar. But anyway.
So, but as you think about these changes, and moving from a world in which, the Iranians hope to not have access to Twitter, but you've got the Iranian president now sort of saying, if you can't lick them, join them, and being out there tweeting. What do you surmise will be perhaps the change in the way governments actually think about how they make policy? What is the role of the public? What is the role of publics overseas? Will it fundamentally change, and could it lead us to greater transparency?
Well, I don't know if transparency is necessarily the word I would use, but it's definitely the case. I mean, frankly, the Iranians have been quite savvy in this regard. It's definitely the case that more and more of these negotiations and initiated interactions will happen publicly. I mean, again, you see the Iranians, Nancy Pelosi's daughter and the Iranian foreign minister having an exchange on Twitter about the previous government's Holocaust denials. And that happening on Twitter before it happened, before any sort of comments to that effect in the UN. So I think it will be increasingly the case that savvy nations and leaders will understand that I have a forum here, a very, very public broadcast forum, to engage in diplomacy in a very public way, maybe even as a precursor to the behind-the-scenes diplomacy I want to engage in, or as an accompaniment to the private diplomacy I want to engage in. So I absolutely think it will be increasingly the case that you see these sorts of public exchanges in parallel to the private discussions, or as a precursor to the private discussions, as a way of signaling, if nothing else, to other countries and other people what their intentions are.
It's also a way, though, to float an idea.
Well, precisely.
Because in the past, when governments have used their public relations arms to get their point of view out, there isn't any information coming back, right? It's a one-way communication.
That's exactly right. No, I think that's absolutely right. I do think that it will also be the case that leaders and governments will have to assume that there is no more ability. They can block Twitter and Facebook now, but it will increasingly be the case that you will either have to block everything or assume that there's no way to control information flow between silos that you may have intentionally set up. It will be the case that if someone wants to broadcast something from over there, it will absolutely be heard by the people over here. And you will not be able to prevent that from happening, and governments will have to assume that that's going to happen and govern based on the fact that there will be complete access to information.
So as you've also had some disagreements.
I think that's good, by the way. I think that should hopefully goes without saying, but I think that's great.
You've also had disagreements with the US government. And in fact, with the
Not me
government-
personally.
Twitter.
Let me just.
Are you
just
about
go
to
back.
separate from Twitter
In case
now?
the IRS is in the room, I am totally fine with everything personally that we want to do. I am one happy taxpayer. The company, on the other hand, no issues.
So when New York wanted when New York wanted the names for protesters in Occupy Wall Street, when the Justice Department wanted to know who was supporting WikiLeaks, what was Twitter's response?
Well, I think we've pushed back on those things, and we'll continue to push back on those things. When we don't think we have received a valid legal request, we will push back on those. And in fact, in reaction to some legal requests, we've gone out of our way and, in the WikiLeaks case, spent a great deal of our own money to protect our users' rights to privacy. The WikiLeaks case was only about our ability to inform those users that their information was being requested so that they could fight that request for the information if they so chose. And I think that
so it isn't that you're saying you can't have the information, you're saying you can't have it without our telling the user.
I mean, all we were asking in that case was we don't think we should have to give this to you without informing these people that they should have the ability to protest handing over their information. And several of them did protest the handing over of their information, and were able to then have that out in the open, that protest and that court fight. I think that, you know, and keep in mind, in different countries, there are some of these laws that are even more a little bit Kafkaesque around things like there are injunctions, for example, in countries that are based on old media laws and the injunctions might say be distributed to several major media outlets and say things like, not only are you not permitted to go on air and say that, you know, there's news that this person may have engaged in this kind of behavior, but you are also not allowed to go on air and say there is an injunction preventing you from saying that, right? Mm-hmm. These things called super injunctions, and they're incredibly Kafkaesque, and in a world where anybody can now broadcast whatever they think, the fascinating thing about things like super injunctions is they encourage, of course, people to go to platforms like Twitter and say, I'm not allowed to say XYZ, hashtag super injunction, right? And so, because the cost to them of you're not going to go punish John Q. Public for saying this thing that you would have punished some major media company for. So I think that the media law in many countries will have to transform. It's against the law in Turkey to say certain things about the founder of the country, Ataturk. Well, you know, it turns out that if you give everybody in the country this platform to say whatever they want, some of them want to say the things that you're not supposed to say about Ataturk. And I think that, again, across the world, it will be interesting to see the way that the speech laws change or don't over time. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you know, back to the sort of your standing up and taking the stand you took with respect to both New York and the Department of Justice. Now that you've gone public, will the equation be different? I mean, will you have to be looking?
No. So the funny thing, I feel like that line in The Princess Bride where the Spanish swordsman says, "Well, I'm smiling because I know something you do not." I actually am left-handed, so the metaphor falls down there. But so the thing that I want to say about that is, the funny thing about these issues is that they're never between the goals of the business and the rights of the users. They're almost always between the rights of this user and the rights of that user, right? I'll give you another example. So, you know, we have all sorts of VIPs and celebrities and politicians on the platform. And it turns out that some people like to go on the platform and just say, you're an idiot, and you know, so is your sister, and here's a picture of you and your idiot sister, and they like to say that like, you know, 19 times a day. And this person over here is thinking it would be great to be able to use this platform without having to hear every 4 seconds from this person over here who thinks I'm an idiot, in all caps with vulgarity and exclamation points and everything else. And so this person over here says I should be able to say whatever I want to say, and this person over here says I should be able to use this platform, right? And so the challenges we have as a company in offering this product to everybody and really building this global town square is you want everyone to be able to have a voice, but not have to listen to, you know, 19 people yelling fire while you're trying to pick up the signal in this global town square. And so it's really both a programming challenge and an algorithmic challenge and a balancing of user rights challenge. Much, much more so, those issues are much, much more complex than any of the issues related to balancing the needs of the business with the desire to defend our users' rights.
Now, sort of, when I asked you about data being requested by, or information being requested by governments, your response was that all you are asking is the ability to tell the user. When it comes to advertising, I mean, obviously the data that is gathered, those of us who use Twitter, are creating a map of what our interests are, right? And what our preferences are. That's unbelievably valuable to an advertiser. How do you monitor, how do you turn that into something useful for the advertiser while at the same time thinking about the user's interests?
Well, I think we've done a great job there of balancing the ability for users to protect their privacy with the desire on our advertisers' parts to be able to reach the kinds of people they want. For example, when I signed up for Twitter, I didn't have to tell Twitter where I lived or what my address, you know, what my age was or what my, you know, all these, how many kids I have, et cetera. And yet, I follow the University of Michigan basketball team. I follow several basketball teams. I follow a number of other University of Michigan accounts. Right? And so you start to get this very, very actually clear map of the kinds of things I'm interested in that turn out to be particularly interesting and valuable to advertisers that, gee, I would love to be able to reach, you know, people who are basketball fans who are interested in these kinds of things, or people who look like the followers of this kind of account. And so I think there's a healthy balance there and a very advantageous to the business balance between an interest graph that paints a very clear picture of the kinds of things I might be interested in and that advertisers want to reach me about, with my ability to be as anonymous as I want based on not having to give specific demographic information about myself to Twitter.
Now,
usually it's the case that you request explicit demographic information in service to trying to infer what these interests are. We have this very explicit interest graph that doesn't require all the demographic information.
Yeah. One of the bits of information you didn't mention about yourself as the advertiser is looking at you is your background in comedy. And so let me just, you know.
It turns out the advertisers aren't interested in that.
Yeah, that's not a big market, the improv guys. That's not a big consumer. So here you are. You went to Michigan in Ann Arbor. You had a degree in computer science.
Right.
You graduated much to your parents' delight.
Yes.
You were offered
much to my delight as well, let me tell you.
Well, I wasn't referring to surprise.
It was a big relief to all of us.
Yeah, okay. So, and you were offered a bunch of really great jobs in internet companies, and instead you decide to
not internet companies, they weren't around yet.
Oh,
But,
good point.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, but I didn't get the demographics on
but
your age.
technology
so-
companies.
Yeah. Okay. Technology companies, and then you turn them down and go back to Chicago to go do improv at Second
Yeah.
City.
Yeah.
How disappointed was your mother?
Well, it's a good question. I never really asked her that. I remember calling them and telling them I was going to go do this, and there was, this silence on the other end of the phone. So it turns out that at University of Michigan at the time, when I was getting a CS degree there, it's now the case that the computer science department, much like everywhere else, is in the engineering school. But at the time, the computer science department was in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts at Michigan. So I had to get a certain number of arts credits to graduate. And my senior year, believe me, it was funny to everyone. Someone laughed over that. It was funny to me at the time. And so I decided, well, I'm going to take these theater classes my senior year, because what I really want to do is I don't want to be bothered with a bunch of homework in these arts classes. I'll take a theater class where I won't really have a ton of homework, and I can focus on my CS work. And I liked the first one I took so much that I took another one my second semester, and I also started saying, well, gosh, that was really fun. Maybe I'll go do the stand-up at the student union on the open mic night on Wednesday nights. And then by the time the end of the second semester, my senior year rolled around, I was like completely hooked, and I just called my parents and said, I'm not going to take any of these offers. I'm going to go to Chicago and try to get into Second City, the improv group there. And so I did that, and then stayed there for a number of years, and eventually migrated over to the Annoyance Theater, where a bunch of Second City people went. And I mean, it was, it's incredible. I use a bunch of that stuff actually in my management practices at Twitter, a bunch of the things that I learned at Second City. I had the good fortune to perform with Steve Carell, who looks at Second City, who looks exactly like now, the way you show people a picture of us, 25 years ago, and everyone goes, well, that's Steve Carell. Which one were you? I saw him at this fundraiser at the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital last year, and we were talking about the group we were in at Second City. He patted me on the back and said, I'm really sorry it didn't work out for you. And so anyway, talk about it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. He's fantastic.
Well, so I'm wondering about, I'm back with your mother here, but you founded 3 companies. You sold all 3 companies.
Yeah.
You now successfully took Twitter public. I would think that would kind of sort of dull the sting for your mother, or
I think she's in good. I think she's in
feeling
good shape
better
now. Yeah. After I was, my brother called me last week. He said, "You're on page A1 and B1 of the New York Times. Like, I'm looking for you in the weekend arts section, and I don't see you anywhere." So anyway.
And you said that humor, though, has helped you in running the company.
Yeah. Well, it's really the lessons from improvisation. I mean, one of the first things you learn at Second City when you're first kind of taking classes there is when someone initiates something on stage, don't say no. Don't say, if they go to reach out for something, grab it. Don't say, like, what are you doing? There's no lemonade there. Are you crazy? Don't do that. Just say yes and. Don't even say yes but. Say yes and to everything. And the notion behind yes and is accepting what the person has initiated and then amplifying that. And I tell my teams within Twitter, if you're having a cross-functional discussion, you are not allowed to say you're not allowed to do that. One of the ways that bureaucracies love to build up inside growing organizations is they find things they're good at, and then they tell everybody else, you're not allowed to do that, only we are allowed to do that, right? So I've told everyone inside the company, you're not allowed to say, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to say, you can't do that. You must have a bias to yes, right? In fact, you can say, I think if you do that, you'll get arrested, and you should go tell Dick you want to do that, but you're not allowed to say, you're not allowed to do that. And those kinds of things remove organizational friction and make the company feel smaller and a much more fun place to work, because people don't feel like there's this nameless, faceless group over there that's telling me I can't do that.
Yeah. Now, of course, we all worry, we users worry that we'll say something just stunningly stupid that will really catch us up when we're, applying for the next job or going before the Senate for the confirmation hearings. Oh no, our kids are worried about college admissions, and the possibility of saying something that seemed like really smart at the moment, later does not work out so well. And I would think that improv really opens one up to that risk. So let me ask you.
Yeah, it turns out you're right.
Yeah, should have called me.
Biz Stone, one of the co-founders of Twitter, I'll just tell you, when we were in New York for the opening of at the New York Stock Exchange, Biz said, by the way, the next time you're thinking of doing XYZ, just call me and I'll tell you, that's a bad idea. You shouldn't do that. And then he said, maybe I should offer that as a service to all Twitter users. Hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing. Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. So I don't know what the source was of the joke on Twitter that a snake, a cobra broke loose from the Bronx Zoo.
The Bronx Zoo. The Bronx Zoo snake.
It started to tour New York. It got to Wall Street.
Yeah, the Bronx Zoo snake. There was the story about the snake getting out of the Bronx Zoo. Someone created the Bronx Zoo snake Twitter account, and the snake went on a tour of New York.
And when he got to Wall Street?
I mean, just this is an example of the kinds of creativity that people will bring to the platform. That's, it's incredible.
So he's avoiding this. But so when he gets to Wall Street, he says, I'm leaving Wall Street quick. These guys make my skin crawl. So here's my question. How did that serve you in the midst of your IPO? Is that one of those things that came back to stick, or?
No, I mean, the great thing about our IPO was, Vivian was there. She should come up and tell you, but she rang the bell. I don't even know what it's like to ring the bell. The head of the stock exchange said, you'll never get to do this again. And I said, I'm not getting to do it the first time. So the amazing thing about that was having our users up there, Vivian and Patrick Stewart and a woman from the Boston PD, when Gabriel Stricker, who runs our communications team, suggested it to me, I was immediately taken by, that's absolutely the right way for us to do this. Our users have really defined so much about the platform and really in so many ways built the scaffolding and the language of the platform. It's just such a great idea to have them up there front and center. So it was much more of just sort of another business day for me. In fact, we flew back to San Francisco after the opening of the stock exchange, so that we could be, so that all of us who were in New York could be back here in San Francisco with the team that night. And I remember I was on CNBC in the morning, and the Carl Quintanilla, the anchor, asked me incredulously, so I hear you're going back to San Francisco today, and it struck me as odd that he thought that was funny. Like, of course I'm going to go back to San Francisco and be with, what else would we do? I don't know where else we'd rather be. In fact, we after the opening bell, we ran out of the stock exchange, and there was a light rain, and we said, look, we want to go up to the office in New York and say hi to everyone in the New York office before we fly back. So let's just take the 4 train from Wall Street up to Midtown. And we ran into the subway, and we got on the 4 train, and I'm standing there on the 4 train going up to Midtown, and it's jammed, it's rush hour, and this guy next to me looks down at his phone, and looks up at me, and looks back down at his phone, and then looks up at me and says, "Are you the CEO of Twitter?" And I said, "Yeah." "I just saw you on CNBC. What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, this is the best way to get, to Midtown." And he said, "Yeah, the subway is really the best kept secret in the city. And we're like jammed in. There's nowhere to move on the train." They're like, it's not really that great a secret because I can barely breathe, Anyway, I don't remember why I decided to say that.
So
anyway, I think my point was, like, the IPO was for us just another, I'm not saying this facetiously. It was really just another, like, blocking and tackling day for us. The real joy was coming back here to the office and everyone in the office really having this moment of pride of everything that had been accomplished, and yet knowing that investors were buying into this belief in everything that Twitter can become and all this enormous amount of work ahead of us.
Yeah. Well, all of us in this room, are particularly glad that you think coming back to San Francisco is what you would most like to do. I know that Charlotte Schultz is thrilled that Twitter is in this city, as is Mayor Lee, as are we. So let's raise our glass of lemonade to a great company in a great city.
Cheers. We couldn't be happier to be in San Francisco. Thanks very much.